legacy of Guilford's first town librarian. Edith was the first director of Guilford Free Library, where she served for 44 years, retiring in 1978. For another 36 years, she was a loyal volunteer, developing the library's historical archives. The library's historic room is named in her honor. We are pleased to co-sponsor this series with the Guilford Keeping Society. Our speakers tonight include Pat Lovelace, Keeping Society Museum Director, Joel Helander, Town Museum, Town Historian Matt Hoy, Guilford First Selectman, and Chris Balestracci, one of Carl's 4 sons. Let's get started with a video clip from an interview with Carl Balestracci in 2009. This was conducted at the old Sunny Side Up restaurant with Tony Fabiani. It's about 2 minutes, and Carl tells the story of how the Balestracci family came to Guilford.
How did the Balestraccis come to Guilford? How did that happen?
In 1937, my father answered an ad in the paper for a ditch digger.
Where was your father living?
He and my mother were married in 36. They were living in Stony Creek. My father was opening oysters for a penny apiece and working on one of the thimbles. He did several things, but he answered an ad for a ditch digger on Saturday. Mr. Whitehead, who owned what's now Clinabed, put the ad in, and he came to Guilford and made $7 digging the ditch all day Saturday, and Mr. Whitehead asked him to come back on Sunday, which he did. He made another $7, and Mr. Whitehead never let him go. He gave my parents the building lot where I grew up for free.
Where was that?
On Halleck Street, right alongside the side driveway to the factory. When Mr. Whitehead gave my parents the building lot for $1, he had to give them $1 for legal fees. Judge Conway, who was Mr. Whitehead's lawyer, said, well, if that so-and-so can give you the lot for $1, I'm only going to charge you $1 for the legal fees. So for $2, my parents got a building lot, and they ended up starting the house in 1941, and I was a year old and lived there until I went in service.
I know I read somewhere that your grandfather worked at the quarry, the Stony Creek Quarry.
My grandfather, Aldo Balestracci, came to America in 1911. My grandmother, they had one daughter, Adelaide, who was about 3, I think, at the time. My grandmother was pregnant when when my grandfather left Italy. He, of course, hadn't even seen my father yet. And he came and worked in Niantic for the gray granite quarries over there, earned enough money to send over for my grandmother, and they arrived through Ellis Island, like my grandfather did, and then shortly after that they moved to Stony Creek, and I think my grandfather Aldo worked in the Beatty Quarry for a while, and then they actually had rented a room from the Weiner family on 146 in Stony Creek, and they shared the same table, and they'd have Passover dinner on one holiday, and they'd have Christmas dinner on the other holiday. And when my grandparents were able to buy their own building lot, the Weiners gave them a cow to bring with them, because they said they need fresh milk, for the growing family. And then they moved to there.
The topic of growing up in Guilford was one of Carl's many talks at the library. His knowledge and interests are reflected in this wide-ranging list of programs, including an appreciation of Guilford artist Charles Hubbard, military history programs, a program on Native American artifacts, and more. I'll end here with just one more video. This is from another library program called Memories of Guilford, featuring Edith Nettleton, Carl Balestracci, Stanley Barnes, and moderated by Penny Colby, where he talks about the schools he attended and playing the drums in the band. Here we go. Oops, wrong way.
We went over to, for a year, Stanley, before your school was built, Calhoun. We went over to Boston Street School, across from Page's Insurance now, and now it's a condominium. My wife and I had the opportunity to go there after the first of the year to a party, and I actually got to go upstairs to what's now a bedroom, but it was my classroom, and Miss Griffith Mrs. Griffin. Griffin was my teacher, and I learned to read in that room, but we were there for a year. And I remember that year that Don Cunningham came to town, Stanley, and he started a band. And it didn't matter what age you were, if you played an instrument, you were in the band. And I forget what, I started playing the drums at 9, but we had rehearsals in the boiler room down in the basement. And the boiler room, it was like an upside down spider with the tubes going all over the place. And the only place that, I can't remember his first name, but this big tall guy from the high school named Johnson, Ron Johnson, and he played the tuba, and there was only one place in between these pipes that he could play the tuba. But the drum section sat on top of the carpenter's bench. Mr. Mueller, Mullen was the custodian, and Freddie Mullen, and he wanted to come teach us how to play paradiddles in the middle of rehearsal. But anyway, we started there, and I think today, my God, if there was an OSHA back then, the whole town would have been shut down. But anyway, we went down to Calvin, which was Ingleman's Field, to watch Mr. Cox and Mr. Richmond Curtis dig the first shovel of soil out for the Calvin School. And then a year or two later, a year and a half later maybe, we moved in to Calvin, and that was memorable because we had in the whole school of Calvin, we actually had 3 male teachers. But Mrs. Hubbard was our first principal, the principal before Stanley, and we were all scared to death of her. I remember one day when Mr. Cole's pants ripped in recess, we were playing football, he had to go home and change his clothes, and Mrs. Hubbard came in to read us poetry, and you could have heard a pin drop the whole time because we were all pretty frightened of her too. But then we spent 7 years of what's now the Adams School. That was junior high and then a high school. And again, if you played an instrument, you were in a band. It didn't matter what age you were. So I had like 7 letters in the band because I could play the drums and I was in the band. And we graduated the class of 58. And it was really kind of fun for me because after teaching at Adams and then going around to the high school and then Baldwin, I ended up coming back to Adams as principal. So I ended my career there. It was kind of closing the circle.
And now I'm going to turn it over to Pat Lovelace.
We have to stand on this so you can see us. Okay, the picture on the left, your left, is of Carl with part of the Art Heitman Native American collection, which Carl obtained for us, which we have on display at our Griswold house. One of the most precious memories I have of Carl is everything he gave us. Every time he came to the museums or to a board meeting, there was always something else he wanted to give us to put in our collection. So he was a member of our board for many years, but also a volunteer. Chris said from the time Chris was a little boy, remembers cooking hamburgers with his dad for our Antiques Festival. So Carl was around for a long, long time. And at our meetings, one of the most important parts and fun parts was when Carl told a story. He always had a story to tell at every board meeting. One of the other things that he gave us were some paintings from Charles Hubbard, and he told the story of his mom slipping some money out of the cash register at their little store and telling him to run over to Mr. Hubbard's house because some of his paintings were on sale. And he also gave us many articles and some of the original shields that Charles Hubbard had started when he was the art teacher there. So we have all of those on display at our Meadad Stone Tavern in the Charles Hubbard exhibit. Another thing that he did, let me go to the next one. Carl had a good collection, a large collection of World War II artifacts. So he gave us, I think we have 4 boxes of them, artifacts from people from Guilford who fought in World War II. And last summer we had an intern who took some 1940s Shoreline Times that were kind of falling apart, and he cut out articles, so you can see that at the Meadad Stone Tavern. It tells all about what Guilford was like during World War II, but it also includes, and we keep rotating them because there are so many, wonderful artifacts of his artifacts. He also gave us, that's the next one. Oh, one of my best memories of Carl was when the Covenant Stone was dedicated down near the Whitfield House. He asked me if I could see if some of our fourth graders could wear their early Guilford Day costumes and be there that day. And Carl rewrote the covenant in new language for modern day and read it, and then the kids got to sign it. But the fun part was 2 of them were boys and the rest were all girls, about 20 girls. The original covenant was signed by all men. So it's kind of fun to see how times have changed. Carl also, as you can see up there, there are a few, I think Chris is going to talk more about it, of his carvings, but the big white, yeah, okay. What's the bird? Yeah, the big white one. Egret, thank you, I knew it. He gave us those, or Chris gave us those from the family to sell, and we have many of them on sale. And some of Elbridge Hoff, who was somebody he learned how to carve from, we have theirs on sale at our gift shop if anybody is interested in getting one of those. We received a few pieces of furniture after Elbridge Hoff passed away, thanks to Carl, and they're on display at the Tavern Museum. We obtained Elbridge Hoff's woodworking shop, which will be in our barn, which will become the Balestracci Hoff woodworking barn. We also obtained many woodworking books from Mr. Hoff's collection, which we have, all thanks to Carl. He was able to get all of these things for us. He did many talks on Guilford history, as she said, both here at the library and at our annual meetings, so he did it quite often. And if you want to see a lot of the things that he donated, please come visit our museums at Thomas Griswold House Museum and the Mead at Stone Tavern Museum. And now I'd like to turn the talk over to Joel Helander, wherever you're hiding, Joel. Oh, he's hiding in the back.
There's a few of you.
Sure.
Pat, there's your other slide that you wanted to
that
show.
slide, I'm sorry. This is a picture I found today in a library collection of Carl and Elbridge Hoff. And Chris remembered that this was a trophy that Mr. Hoff made and was for some fight and drum corps thing that Carl was involved in. So I forgot about that last one.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Carl A. Balestracci Jr. And he always used the junior. And I'd like to believe that even long after his dad had passed, I think it was kind of an honor to be the namesake for his dad. Saturday, June 28th, 1969. Just an ordinary date for all of us, I suppose, but not for me. It was just 54 years ago, in 1969, that I met this man for all seasons, Carl A. Balestracci Jr. It was on a field trip, that I called it, which I had advertised in my monthly neighborhood newspaper, the Clabbered Hill News. I was 17. Participants were invited to meet me at my parents' home on Clabbered Hill on Saturday, June 28th, 1969, where we would embark by cars to the Goss property off Goose Lane. And from there, we would hike an old trail to a genuine bear cave, cranberry bog, the old highway that passed through there known as the Stage Road. And all of these places had been subject to one of my articles in the Clabbered Hill News. Well, Carl appeared with, I think, maybe both of his sons, but at least Chris was there, and he was 7 years of age. And he joined our group of hikers. And in a couple of hours, on that June 28th, 1969, the common interests of Carl and myself connected in a large way. Later in 1969, I connected with Carl when he dismantled and salvaged an old barn, timber frame barn on Church Street in Guilford, which would have been otherwise razed during the construction of the Guilford Court subsidized housing. And shortly after the new millennium, he invested personal funds again to rescue an old building using his own manual labor to save another 19th century barn on property that is now the Shoreline Medical Center for Yale. Carl's ethic of preservation for historic sites that could be lost was strong. And down through the years, we tackled similar projects of preservation, not the least of which was a formidable project undertaken by the Faulkner's Light Brigade to pursue preservation of an endangered lighthouse. He gave, the 10-year project, as many of you know, culminated with restoration of this very revered landmark and also involved in an island erosion control project. Senator Dodd, a boater and a sailor like Carl, offered hope for the Faulkner's Light Brigade to pursue preservation of the lighthouse on Faulkner's. He gave the brigade its original charge to build partnerships with local and state agencies before the federal government would step in, and that's just what happened. Now here Carl appears with Senator Dodd, and I believe that's George Godovan, formerly the building inspector, actually presently an assistant building inspector for the town of Guilford. Well, Carl and I had many common interests. We both acquired islands of our own. Carl purchased in Long Island Sound Outer Whitetop for novelty and for preservation. And as for myself, I was able to purchase Little Goose Island, southwest of Faulkner's Island. So I always seemed to follow my mentor in so many different things. Issues of preservation regarding the little old smallpox cemetery on the west bank of the East River and the town-owned pest house attracted Carl's attention. He invited Dr. Nick Ballantoni, a state archaeologist, to visit the cemetery enclosure for use of ground-penetrating radar. And as had been mentioned earlier, Guilford Free Library was indeed one of the homes of Carl's heart since boyhood. And in fact, ironically, during his tenure as first selectman, the library was expanded by 14,000 square feet. Carl loved the Nettleton Historical Room, and he loved Edith Nettleton, as we all do, one of Guilford's history mentors for him. Carl had collaborations with so many different historical groups. One of them, of course, was the Henry Whitfield State Museum, and became involved in exhibits and special projects all along the way. Oh, how Carl loved special projects, especially commemorations that celebrated Guilford history. It always struck me as singularly unique that this incredible man, Carl A. Balestracci Jr., embraced and adopted Yankee Puritan ethics when he himself had a totally different cultural ancestry. And on the 200th anniversary of a British raid on East Guilford in which Captain Phineas Meggs was shot and killed, Carl made sure that Guilford participated along with its sister town, Madison. And here he is. Quite startling During the 350th anniversary celebration of Guilford's founding, Carl marched with the Ancient Mariners, a fife and drum corps. In fact, as I'm sure Chris will probably mention a little later, Carl marched in parades all over the Northeast with the Ancient Mariners Fife and Drum Corps as a drummer, including an appearance once, I'm told, in Switzerland. He also sang with the Mariners side group, the Shantymen, performing to give audiences a historical presentation using sea chanties. Carl helped organize and participate in the commemoration of Congressman Abraham Baldwin's 200th anniversary of birth in North Guilford. He superintended creation of a monument, in granite of course, dedicated to Baldwin, which stands to this day in a hayfield on Great Hill Road. And Pat mentioned this, again with commemorations and monuments in granite. Carl was always ready. Just in time for the 375th year anniversary celebration of Guilford's founding, Carl conceived the idea of honoring the founding fathers or covenanters with placement of a granite monument inscribed with every covenanter's name. It commemorates the commitment of our founders and the spirit of community that still characterizes Guilford after 384 years. The dedication of this covenant stone, as it's known, involves school children, and Pat mentioned this, who reenacted the signing of the Guilford Covenant on shipboard in 1639. Carl, as we know, also orchestrated the erection of a granite monument on the south end of the green that honors and commemorates sacrifices by Guilford soldiers who gave their lives during World War II. This was the dedication of the Guilford Covenant in a small park in front of the Whitfield State Museum. If you haven't seen it, it's a must-see. Another mini landmark in Guilford, thanks to Carl A. Balestracci Jr. Carl embraced and honored the sacred traditions of Guilford's first inhabitants, the Native Americans, notably the Monunkatucks and the Quinnipiac Indians. He encouraged, as Pat mentioned, the late Arthur Heitman to donate his Native American artifact collection to the Guilford Keeping Society. One event that I'll never forget as long as I live was a sacred reburial of Native American skeletal remains recovered on the shore of Guilford and brought into my office, startling me half to death, one day when my office was under Carl's. And as it turned out, the remains had been found in Guilford 50 years prior. And of course, we called in the state archaeologist, but ultimately we had them reinterred in the Alderbrook Cemetery. And Carl made a plain field stone for the grave, which contains a moving inscription. This is yet another one of his acts of preservation that serves to honor and educate. I think in this photo, as I look at it, Carl had made a basket for the skeletal remains made out of grapevines. Besides a little outer white top off Mulberry Point, which Carl owned, Carl and Linda acquired a historic cottage on Money Island in the legendary Thimbles. From that idyllic base of summer operations, they boated around the Thimbles and hobnobbed with other islanders. Here, he pilots his boat into the wharf at High Island to attend a picnic for the Guilford Keeping Society Board of Directors. And with that organization, Pat has mentioned how heavily involved he was for many, many years. The fact that two of Carl's grandfathers were stonemasons and worked in quarries gave Carl a spirited appreciation for quarries and their workers. This has also been mentioned this evening, his epic book about John Beatty's Granite Quarries in Leeds Island celebrates and honors the quarrymen in the quarry that supplied every block of granite in the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. On the subject of the Guilford Keeping Society, Carroll served on the GKS Board of Directors, as mentioned tonight. He made board meetings lively and fun. As chairman of the Historic House Plaque Committee, Carl was overseer of issuing plaques for homeowners with houses built over 100 years ago. Carl gave great attention to the sons and daughters of Guilford, who went on to make significant contributions to society, such as Charles D. Hubbard and our very own Dr. Elizabeth C. Adams. His affinity with the life of Charles Hubbard, Guilford's historian, artist, writer, was such that Carl donated, Pat mentioned this memorabilia, to establish an entire room in the Medad Stone Tavern to honor Hubbard. Before the old Guilford High School was demolished, it was Carl A. Balestracci Jr. who rescued all of the class shields dating back to 1913, hanging in the library of the school. Many of them had been painted by Hubbard, and the dream is to have them rehung. That's another work in progress. And Katie Balestracci, I know you're here. We will be calling on you once upon a day to work on that project. Having retired from a career in teaching, and our first selectman, Matt Hoy, will address this tonight, Carl, of course, sought and won the Guilford First Selectman's position. What a natural role for a son of Guilford to serve the town he loved. Well, I had to mention something about Carl's term in office. Because it was indeed a historical gallery, furnished like a museum with memorabilia, such as a 19th century desk from the old Guilford Institute, a grandfather's clock from the 1933 library, his bird carvings, and of course, Charles Hubbard paintings. All of Carl's 6 years working in Venerable Town Hall coincided with my years working in Town Hall as well. My office was on the ground floor, directly under Carl's office on the second floor. So soon after his inauguration, for a very short time only, we had a little kind of a foot stomping code to get one another's attention, but this really didn't last long because it really set up vibrations in adjoining offices. Now, you know, as perhaps an English and history major, I better be careful of my verbs. It wasn't foot stomping and it wasn't foot stamping, it was foot tapping. Okay. So, you know, needless to say, Carl's office, as this photo would indicate, was pretty approachable. His open door policy knew few boundaries, such as the day some of his grandchildren's friends stopped for a visit. It was on Carl's watch, his first selectman, that the 580-some acre Goss property was acquired by the town of Guilford. Otherwise known as Guilford's East River Preserve, this extraordinary purchase was another act of preservation that saved open space from inevitable development. So here's Carl. I believe he's at the head of the table, the closing table that is, in the selectmen's wing. Brothers Dirk and George Goss are seated with their respective attorneys. So my final shot, I think, was kind of classic of Carl Balestracci. You know, here he is with Fire Chief Charles E. Hershaft during a fundraising event, and I believe this was taken in the parking lot of J.J. Sullivan, Inc. for a GFFE, Guilford Fund for Education fundraiser. So it's one way I like to remember Carl Balestracci, and perhaps we can all remember him in this way, ever friendly, ever unassuming, a sturdy son of Guilford who cared and contributed at every twist and turn. So we who knew and loved Carl Balestracci realize more than ever that his grievous loss comes only where great blessing has been. And with that, I believe we turn it over to First Selectman, no, Chris. Chris Balestracci. Oh, Matt next? Okay. Okay.
Good evening. It's always a challenge to follow someone who is so polished and good at speaking. So that was tremendous, Joel. Really a wonderful job, a wonderful tribute. I'm one who needs notes. I'm coming of an age where I can't remember everything I really want to say. So I'm honored to be here to celebrate a son of, and really the spirit of Guilford. If you are fortunate or lucky enough to have come across role models you emulate in the various aspects of your life, you are indeed fortunate and lucky. This is when I bring up prop number one. I don't know if people can see this. This is a copy of the inaugural address, JFK, and my earliest role models were my mom and dad. One line in that speech, that inaugural address, was quoted frequently in our 1960s Democratic era household. And that was, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. They were also words to live by, as both my mom and dad were active, like your dad was, active members of the community in Old Saybrook where I grew up. So when Carl stopped by to visit me early in my first term, this was his gift to me. I can't tell you how much that meant. He tied together my childhood with my adult life and the common bond we had of serving our community. Apparently these were all presented to individuals who received official invitations to the inauguration. True to form, Carl said, and it is written on the back, that it was his secret as to how he came into possession of this particular item. Classic Carl on so many levels. Carl lived that line as well, and the attributes, contributions, accolades, and stories shared tonight are testimony to that fact. In my many years of service to Guilford, I was fortunate to have role models and mentors. Carl specifically, along with Bob Hartman Sr. and Jim Kennefick, were there for me. Please note that two of those three were Republicans. I mention that because Carl was the first in line to help his party, but once elections were over, it was time to get to bipartisan work, doing what was best for his beloved town. For Carl, it was all about working together to make Guilford the best place to live, work, and raise a family. Carl approached appointed and elected roles with dignity, enthusiasm, gusto, and even temper and compassion. He was beloved by his staff members, including those I was lucky enough to inherit, some of which are in this room tonight. I am proud to be in the same club as Carl, the First Selectmen's Club, and trust that he would be proud of my efforts. He had a hand in fashioning how I comport myself in this office. Prop number two. This is the Connecticut Register and Manual. It is published annually by the Secretary of State. It lists all elected officials in state government, local government. It also lists board and commission members. Carl first appeared in this document in 1977, maybe 78, because sometimes they write it after the fact, after somebody's been appointed. He last appeared in this in 2017. If my math is correct, that's 39 years, right? And let me just recount for you some of the other things in his political and civic life. 1966 to 2019, proud member of the Guilford Democratic Town Committee, and he chaired it from 1969 to 1972. In 1970, he was on the State Democratic Platform Committee. 1977 through 1996, he served on the Guilford Police Commission, chairing the commission in 1984. From December of 2001 to December of 2003, he served his first term as first selectman. He then, in 2002, he was again on the State Democratic Platform Committee. Re-elected to the Board of Selectmen in December of 2003, he served to 2005, when he was elected once again to the First Selectman's office in 2005, serving to 2007. 2006, he served as Secretary of the South Central Regional Council of Governments. 2006 to 2009, he was Chair of the Central Connecticut Medical Emergency Dispatch Board of Directors. In December of 2007, 2009, he was elected to First Selectman. 2009, he was a chairman of the South Central Regional Council of Governments. And the last one that I recorded, 2013 to 2017, he was on the Board of Selectmen once again. That is an amazing litany of public service and commitment to one's community, one's region, and humanity in general. On a personal note, I've already mentioned a couple of that. When I was a youngster, starting to go to Democratic Town Committee meetings, it became apparent to me that there was a storyteller. And he was a storyteller. But he had a partner in crime, a guy by the name of Marty Ford. And I used to sit in the back of the room with the two of them, and I was admonished on many occasions for laughing in the middle of meetings, because the two of them would be there telling me these stories that I couldn't believe were true. So I want to thank both of them for getting me in all the trouble that I got in back in the day. So thank you very much for listening to the words that I was able to put together for my friend, my mentor, my role model, Carl L. A. Balestracci, Jr. Thank you.
That's a summary too of his.
Is this okay, Bob? Bob was nice enough to get us that step ladder, but do I need it? This is okay, right? I know I'm short. So thank you for coming, all friends and family and others from Guilford. So I want to thank Loretta very much and the Guilford Library for having this and putting this on. And I do have an autographed copy of the John Beatty and his Quarryman book for Loretta as a thank you later on. And also, anybody who would like, you can put your name in a free raffle for a copy. There's a copy of his book over there signed by him. They're signed on the first page of the book. Just put your name on a piece of paper from the First Selectman's office in the little basket, and we'll draw it at the end of the evening. So I figured I'd start out with a quote from his nomination run for the First Selectman, because it talks about his feelings about the town. I feel most fortunate to have lived and grown up in Guilford, to the people who helped and nurtured me along the way. I feel a great indebtedness of all those people for all of us. For our community, I earnestly believe that we must continue their legacy of hard work, thoughtful decisions, and their spirit of being, quote, helpful each to the other in any common work. This is from the covenant. We must have the courage and the goodness to follow that simple precept for them. We will honor the past in our work for the future. And that, as Pat and Joel and Matt said, that's from the Guilford Covenant. The Guilford Covenant was signed June 1st, 1639, and then the stone was rededicated in June of 2014. My dad learned a lot of his street sense from my grandparents' store. This was Carl's Market, which is where the Shoreline Wine Exchange and Deke's Bagels is now, over across from the Italian Bistro. They eked out a living there for 20 years. That was before Big Y, before Finest, before the Guilford Food Center, and before the A&P, which is where the CVS is now. That was the first big store in town. So my dad was last married to Linda Coley in 1988, and I have two great step-brothers, David and Kevin, and I have my brother Andy by his first wife, Susie. He had 4 great grandkids, still does. And his legacy of service started early. He was GHS class president of 1958. Now, the interesting thing is, class of 58 was the last class to graduate from what is now Adams Middle School. The class of 58 graduated from the old brick building, and then they built a new high school up on New England Road. And he was the last class to graduate from there. And then he was also UConn freshman class president, and if it hasn't been evident tonight that my dad was a collector of everything, as Pat said, the Keeping Society had, he even kept the Connecticut Daily Campus, which announced over here in this corner his election as freshman class president from Friday, October 21st, 1958, and, not to be outdone, the Shoreline Times, which announced Carl Balestracci class president at UConn, November 26, 1958. He saved everything, everything. He was an airman first class in the Air Force from 59 to 64, and he really did love Guilford. And to give back a little bit, he established the Carl A. Balestracci Jr. Humanitarian Fund at the Guilford Foundation, and to help military veterans, children, and family with special needs in education. He was very proud of the fact that he was the first one in his family to go to high school and graduate, first one in his family to go to college and graduate, and the first one in his family to receive an advanced degree. My grandfather only had an 8th grade education. So then he went to Adams Middle School. Well, first he started his teaching career in New Haven. He was a special ed educator at Ivy Street School, and he met Joe Giannetti sitting in the back there. They had a good time there. Then he went to Adams, taught there for 7 years math and history. He was GHS housemaster for 6 years, co-principal of Guilford High School for 4 years with Barbara Truex. And then he was principal at Baldwin and principal at Adams. And he liked to have a lot of fun, as this picture shows. These are some of the social studies and history teachers. You got Dominic Thomas, Lou Russo, Ron Polverari, Frank Kelly, Ron LaMonica. Now, everything you see, the picture on your right was from the Shoreline Times. My father's parachuting in. He's hanging from the gymnastics rings at Adams Middle School. But everything they're wearing, the hats, the guns, the Indian headdresses, the uniforms, and the picture on the right, those were all from his collection. He brought it in one day and said, hey, let's stage this picture. While he was at Adams, I came home one day as a freshman in high school, and I was all dejected and glum. He says, what's wrong, Chris? I says, I want to join the fencing team. They're not going to have a fencing team because they don't have a coach. So he stepped up and became the faculty advisor. And he said, well, if the juniors and seniors teach the team, I'll be the faculty advisor, and we'll all learn together. So he reestablished, the team was there for 2 years, but they lost their coach, so he reestablished the team in 1976, 77, and he was head coach until 87. Now, the first 2 years, we lost every single dual meet. Then we started taking some lessons. We had some help from Uriah Jones, whose picture is over there. He was the first African American on the U.S. Olympic fencing team. We also had help from Bob Chung. But then we won every single match the next 2 years. We won 2 individual state championships, and we won 2 team championships. And the Guilford High School fence team is the winningest team at the Guilford High School, and probably will be for all time. We won more Connecticut team championships, squad championships, individual state champions. And while my dad was there, we had 5 individual champions, 4 team champions. And since then, we've had over 24 individual state champions, 39 team championships. And I know you math people out there saying, well, 76 in 2019, that's less than 39. Some years there was double championships because there was foil, saber, and epee. All right. And then in 2019, my dad and I were honored by the fencing team. They established the Carl and Chris Balestracci Community Fencing Fund to help promote fencing at the Guilford Community Fund also. And then we have some pictures here. It was the team from 77. And then on your left-hand side is the state championship team from 79 and 80. And that gentleman in the back holding the trophy is there you are. Where are you in the audience? There you are. You're holding as a principal, we gave the trophy to you, Mr. Mead, that year. My dad had a lot of passions and hobbies. Of course, one of them that you all probably know is he loved to make wine. He made wine for many, many years. First few years, it was awful. But then they got much better. He made it with his neighbor, Ray Ambrose, who was a pharmacist. So that sort of helped with the chemical aspect of it. Betty, is that your phone? See, I told you. So Ray Ambrose is there with my dad on your left. They're tasting, they're sampling it from our cellar. As you can see with the fencing stuff in the background, we used to practice in the cellar. And then on the right, your right side, they're very serious, crushing the grapes in the old press that used to have to crank and crank and crank, and the juice would come down, and then they'd put it in the bottles and everything else. It was a lot of fun, actually. And then the middle picture is at Ray's cellar with the destemmer and the bins that we'd put the wine in. He also loved wood carving. He also loved the Ancient Mariners, and he was also an author, as we've talked about. He played the bass drum, the snare drum, and he was Commodore of the Ancient Mariners. And so I kept his hat. His hat's over there on the table. We brought his hat tonight, and his snares and his bass drum. And he also loved the quarry, as was mentioned earlier. He used to give great quarry talks with Unc DeRoss. Unc is on the right-hand side in the red picture there. They used to go to the quarry and do talks because Unc's family, actually his mother, ran the boarding house for a lot of the quarrymen, and my dad had a lot of the history, having written the book. And as I think Joel said, the base of the Statue of Liberty is all Stony Creek pink granite. And it was, actually my dad found the exact location based on the geological makeup of the stone, where the stone from the base of Statue of Liberty came from. And it's right over on the border between Branford and Guilford. And even the visitor center that was built a few years ago is Stony Creek granite. So what I figured would be interesting tonight was my dad was a great writer. So he would take out his yellow pad and he'd start writing, and Linda would then go ahead and make all the corrections for the grammatical areas. So I went through a lot of his writings, and I thought it might be better to hear his words than just my words tonight. So I have a couple stories that he wrote. We're going to call it Buying Liquor Story and a Dr. Adams Story. So this is a story that he wrote in his hand that I found a couple weeks ago. My mother and her lady friends often held ironing parties at our house at 15 Halleck Street, near the condos at 55 High Street, which is now 55 High Street. After their shift at the new departure factory, which was the old Clinnipad, before the Clinnipad, They would all pitch in their quarters and change. And one day, when I was about 4.5 years old, this is June of 1944, 4.5 years old, remember, they put their money in a brown paper bag, they put it in my little red wagon, and told me to walk up to Frank's package store and give it to Frank. I did as I was told, pulling my little red wagon up High Street, then up Whitfield Street, then to Boston Street to Frank's. Now, no cars or vehicles were on the roads because of ration stamps for gas. It was during World War II. In the meantime, my mother picked up the phone receiver and talked to Hazel Tucker, the operator, and asked for Frank. We had a party line, so probably 8 or 10 people knew that baby Carl was going up to Frank's. They also knew that Frank was in the U.S. Army and that his partner was running the store for the duration. When I got to Frank's, his partner took the bag with the money. He put a bottle of PM whiskey and a bottle of ginger ale, put the filled bag back in my wagon and said, "Okay, go straight home." And away I went. Never a vehicle did I meet as I crossed Whitfield Street, headed down High Street to get home. The women mixed their highballs and did their ironing. This is another one. This is another story in his handwriting about Dr. Adams. Growing up in Guilford during the 40s, 50s, and 60s was like having a checkered berry ice cream soda at Mr. Dowden's drugstore on a hot summer day. Cold, sweet, and special. Some of you might remember the checkered berry sodas with vanilla ice cream. We kids had our problems. We suffered our growth pangs. We stumbled through adolescence. And then one day, each in our own time and way, we had to step up to the line and face adulthood. But we were blessed in our time and place by some very special people. They were ordinary people whose love and caring for us made them extraordinary people. One of those extraordinary people we young people were fortunate to share with older folks was Dr. Elizabeth C. Adams, because she cared for everyone. She never seemed to sleep. She never seemed to be on vacation. She was everywhere and everything to everyone who needed help, and she never let us down. Dr. Adams served Guilford for many years in several official capacities, such as health director, police surgeon, and medical examiner. She was the most petite person in town, but the only thing that people looked up to more often was the clock on the First Church steeple. As kids, we would watch in awe as Dr. Adams would stand eyeball to belt buckle with a 250-pound, 6'3" volunteer fireman back then, and flames and sparks crackling around them as she reprimanded him for not following proper safety procedures, and he would listen. We would stop in the middle of 3rd down and 2 on the green, look at each other and snicker as her Volkswagen Beetle beat the ambulance to an accident on Route 1. Everyone in town knew that the car with no driver, this is his words, she could barely see over the steering wheel, was Dr. Adams, and everyone made way. 2 or 3 times a week, Dr. Adams would come into my parents' grocery store, usually in the evening when it wasn't busy. She would say, 7 bags tonight. My mom would line up 7 large grocery bags on the counter. Into each would go a couple of bananas, a bunch of grapes, which Dr. Adams always insisted had to be washed and dried carefully. My father would cut a pound of sliced meat, a pound of cheese for each bag, while I picked out 7 loaves of bread. Next, Dr. Adams would quickly cruise the aisles and select coffee for 5, tea for 2, peanut butter, and some jelly and crackers. She would sometimes choose sugar, always milk, and a pound of number 9 spaghetti for each bag. Then we would all load the bags into the back seat of her bug, and away she'd go in a swirl of dust, Guilford's first one-person welfare department, to deliver her bundles of nourishment along with her medical care. My dad never had to send Dr. Adams a bill. She would always give him more than enough money and would continuously maintain a credit in her account. She never, in 20 years, asked for a tally. She did that for so many people, we wondered How she ever made enough money to pay her own bills. We pondered a lot about this extraordinary little lady who never wanted any recognition. We couldn't even have a birthday party for her because no one knew the date of her birthday or how old she was. In the late 60s, when the North Junior High School, that's what is now Baldwin, was being built, I presented to the Board of Education the idea that we should name both junior high schools after worthy citizens. The board appointed a committee to research the possibilities and make its recommendations. Mrs. Marjorie Giles, Joel Helander, and I met to begin our work. Mrs. Giles asked if we had any preferences. Since I suggested Abraham Baldwin for the North School, Mrs. Giles suggested someone more contemporary for the South School. Joel Helander immediately suggested Dr. Adams. Everyone's face lit up. No explanation was necessary. It was unanimous. The meeting was adjourned after 13 and a half minutes. And I'm going to, at Pat and Loretta's urging, I'm going to make some copies of these and give them to the library, so some of his stories will be here on display at the library. He, oh, you want me to play that? So we have a, here, why don't you do it so I don't mess it up. So we'll have a little video that Loretta's going to play, and then we'll go on.
All right, now enter politics. Because now you're home, you're retired, and this is when you actually, you had actually served on a number of commissions, I guess, over the years prior, while you were teaching.
Right. I had been a police commissioner for 19 years. And prior to that, I was on the police building committee that...
I did a video with you back then when you were moving on, remember that?
I think, yeah, that's right.
They sat me in the jail cell, they videotaped me. I'm gonna be there someday, probably.
And you know, going back to my parents' store and growing up there, that was like the old corner store in the old days. If Les Dudley came in, if Les Spencer from the West Side came in, if the Dudleys from Clabberville came in, I mean, it was talk about politics every day. And my father had a strict rule with me. He told me, he said, you keep your eyes and ears open, and he said, you keep your trap shut. Just listen. But
Did you pay attention?
I had to. I didn't have any choice with my father or my mother. But it was an educational program for me to listen to these people and how active and involved they were, how knowledgeable they were about town government and town workings and whatnot, and how committed all of them were. They all had served on boards of selectmen or different boards and commissions. Like Ray Dudley from Clabberville was chairman of the board of ed at the time, and on and on and on. It was just, and Dr. Adams would come in every day, so that it was just a natural thing for me to be interested in that, and then loving history the way I did and teaching it and whatnot. It was a natural move to go in.
Yeah, you
So he was very involved in politics. He loved politics. Here he is with Senator Dick Blumenthal and Senator John McCain. As Matt said, he was 3 terms as Guilford First Selectman. He was on the Board of Selectmen from 09 to 17. And the John McCain picture actually is on the table over here, inscribed from John McCain, best wishes, Carl. And it just showed that he could work with both sides of the aisle. He was a John McCain fan. And he would work with everyone. He got to meet a lot of interesting people. The picture on the left there is Paul Newman, and you can see my dad was a collector of autographs, and so he got it signed by Paul Newman on the bottom. He worked directly with Senator Abraham Ribicoff, Governor Ella T. Grasso, who was the first female elected governor in the United States, Senator Chris Dodd, Congressman Emilio Daddario, and Robert Kennedy for president. We've got a few letters from Robert Kennedy and Ted Kennedy, and there's it's lying down flat, but there's the letter from Robert Kennedy and some of his stuff that he had over there. I remember him going to the funeral also. And then, I don't know if you realized it, but my dad was a collector. Big collector. Big collector. Linda knows this more than anybody. So he collected everything. So here he is when he was selected. He brought into the town hall his collection of political buttons and bumper stickers and posters and everything. He had another letter from Robert F. Kennedy signed to him. These are all to him from Robert F. Kennedy. And then, of course, you know, he collected everything. So everything you see in this picture, he collected and owned. Much to the chagrin of Linda, this Jeep was in our garage for 10 years. And he owned the Jeep, the shirt, the helmet, the rifle, everything there, until he finally got an offer double what he paid for the Jeep from some Hollywood producer who then had it shipped or trucked out to California. But at least we got the Jeep out of the garage. And he was a big wood carver. He loved to carve, as Pat had said, shorebirds. He called it the Thimble Island Decoy Company. And Ancient Mariner wood carving there is on the table on the left. Some of his birds, the egret, the shorebird, and then also there's an eagle there lying flat. He was a great dad. I'm so proud of him. I was lucky to have him. Hope you had a good time tonight. I urge you to look over there at some of the things on the table. And then don't forget to put your name in for the raffle for the book. And I turn it back over to Loretta.
Thank you all. I hope you can take a moment to just enjoy some refreshments and take a look at the table up here. And thanks to all of our speakers tonight. Really appreciate it. Have a great night.